Welcome, everybody. This is the Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy podcast, the official Society for the Teaching of Marriage and Family Therapy, STMFT in short, podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sofia Georgiadou. I created STMFT in this podcast as an antidote to the isolation I experienced as an early career academic. I also created STMFT in this podcast as a space to allow myself and my colleagues to share resources and bridge the way we do systemic therapy with the way we teach systemic therapy in our classrooms. Today, I have an amazing discussion lined up for you. Our discussion features questions we sourced from a second-year master's in MFT student and an experienced MFT professor who's navigated academia for several years now, and he's here to share his insights. Here with us today, we have Dr. Anthony Pennant. Dr. Pennant is an international speaker, expert in neurodiversity, LGBTQ plus relationships, and attachment and foster care, with a dedicated focus on research and systemic intervention. With a doctorate in couple and family therapy from Antioch, New England, Dr. Pennant has made significant contributions to our field, serving as a master trainer for supervisors through the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, and has published numerous scholarly works. Based in Seattle, Washington, Dr. Pennant operates a private practice where he provides therapeutic support and training, helping individuals and families navigate complex relational dynamics. He's passionate about advocacy and education and engages audiences worldwide, sharing insights that promote understanding and inclusivity within diverse communities. The future MFT and current master student we have with us today is Jazzy Bryant. Jazzy is a Black and Indigenous, non-binary, full-spectrum birth worker and systems thinker who is currently working towards their master's in couples and family therapy. Jazzy is passionate about holistic care and reproductive justice as a liberatory and community-led framework. Like many intuitive caregivers, Jazzy has always been called to care for those around them. Early on, they discovered the power of nourishing bonds and open-hearted support in healing attachment, increasing resilience, and promoting self-determination. Jazzy honors and channels their ancestors as they continue to remember and decolonize authentic ways of being and caregiving. Welcome to you both. Welcome, Dr. Pennant.
Well, thank you, thank you. Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you too. And welcome, Jazzy, to our
Thank you for
podcast.
having me.
Jazzy, I must say, you're the first master student in this podcast. We have historically had doctoral students only. It's a
Wow, what a
big deal.
pleasure for you all.
I love it.
Exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. All right. We'll be exploring some questions that Jazzy generously provided, and I'll be facilitating the conversation, sharing these questions, and I'm excited to hear Jazzy's perspectives and then Dr. Pennant's insights. Without further ado, let's dive into our first question. I like to start our conversation from the premise that therapy is very political, as it has always been, but more so today, given the current legislation movement affecting so many vulnerable populations, thinking about anti-trans laws, the erasure of LGBTQIA2S plus terms from government agencies, the cancellation of grants and research supporting gender-expansive communities, the prohibition of gender-affirming care for youth in many states. In what ways are we staying well enough as educators to resist this harm? Dr. Pennant, I would love to hear your thoughts, your survival mechanisms.
So I love this question. And when I think a little bit about everything that is built into the things that we are seeing now and experiencing, I'll say this: political is such a negative word and connotation and meaning attached to it. And folks like it's divisive, but in its purest form about how we maybe define it, it's how we look at how things are governed. It's how we understand how a collective, whatever that collective is impacted and is relationally relating to something else and vice versa. And so when I think a little bit about therapy, the first thing that comes to mind for me a little bit is that you can't look at therapy, we shouldn't look at therapy as like this modern day 1960s on forward kind of understanding of what impact and support for people's mental health and wellness looks like. Therapy in its various forms has been around for a very long time, and systemic understanding has been around, and intervention has been around for a very long time also. Like understanding that we are embedded within other systems that impact us and vice versa. And so when you go to speak about how a person may have anxiety about whatever given thing. Yes, there is personal biology that has an impact on that, but we are in other contexts that have an impact on us. And so to remove the influence of said influence of the context in people's lived experience seems very disingenuous to say that this is not something that you should worry about or we're going to acknowledge in our therapy rooms because we should. We really should. And so, is therapy political? Coming back to that question, absolutely. Absolutely. It's political for our licensure, for example. Why? Because the laws that are made in each state and in the federal government, which protect our scope of practice, let's be really clear about that too, right? But impact how we're able to actually do our jobs. Not everyone can just do our jobs. And so, we welcome for more therapists, don't get me wrong, but it's a protected thing, just like other jobs are. And I'll go back to again the impact that folks are having right now, given a lot of the laws that are aligning to being more restrictive, if not taking away services and support for people that really need that. It's disheartening to, I think, on twofold to see people in advance not push back against this ability to go, hey, I as a clinician, right, do know the best things about what it is to treat. Just if we go to a medical doctor or any other profession, we pay them for their knowledge and their expertise. And it's not that every time every person is correct, but we acknowledge that they have gone through a lot of studies to make sure that we are well represented and get the support that we need. And so for us as therapists to buckle, I'll use that word on purpose, or divert from what we know is really important and really an impact for people when they're dealing with the fact that there are multiple laws, multiple ways, and multiple attitudes that are changing that say, you're not a human. And it's about gender, it's about sex, it's about race, it's about lived experiences. And to try to categorize people in one way and go, if you don't fit in this, like we're going to do something else with you, or you don't deserve those support and services, is again just more systemic oppression. Right. And so, again, how do we not see that? How do we not understand that the impacts of that on those who are affected, the laws that are geared towards them are affected, and knowing that at some point, it is a possibility that, yes, you are not the target, but you could be, and so, what does that mean? Are you going to ignore that? Or the fact that, this is my last thing about this, or the fact that for me, I identify as some of the targeted populations, and sometimes, and some places I do not, but it hurts me to know that people cannot get the help and support and services that they need. And so to me, knowing that I am also embedded in that community, and that when my neighbor, my friends, my whatever that relationship is unable to access those things, it has an impact on me and my community because they're not able to get what they need. And therefore, that requires other things to happen. And that's how problems end up multiplying in a system. It's a systemic, obviously, context and communities that we live in it. And unfortunately, we just haven't learned how to master that and make sure that the laws and how we do things and the social supports like catches up to that understanding that like we're embedded in communities. And when people hurt, that does impact us in some particular way.
Yeah. Thinking about ways of surviving or resisting right now. And resistance can look like rest, right? It can be just radical rest and setting boundaries and saying no to a lot of things. I'm wondering, what are your ways of resisting right now? Are there conversations held with your students? Are there conversations held within your academic community? What's happening for you right now?
I really love this question, and I did not get to that. So thank you for bringing that back. Yes, rest is resistance. I think it is a really important thing to understand that this is another context I think that we live in, that we're so hyper connected. And specifically in this country, we connect productivity to always working or answering emails and being on the go. And that's not good for us to be in that state, I think, neurologically, of always having to respond to things. It does have an impact, but so rest is important. But what are some of the things that are doing? So this is a little bit of a nuanced kind of conversation in truth about how this has looked. When I saw things changing, I was like, I had conversations with folks that said this was not probably a good idea, and that these like things, these oppressions and restrictive laws and things were coming down the pike. And so I am not personally willing to go out and fight. I think that putting myself out there in that particular manner is just a cost I'm not willing to pay at this point. And I need other people to step up, right? That I think are non people of color, non Black folks that can really start to have honest conversations around how oppression and racism and sexism impact our communities, right? Really be willing to really just get in it and understand that yes, there may be shame that is present in those things, but I myself, as a person of color, cannot help manage any shame that comes up for anybody else, no matter what we're talking about. I can be there to support you, right? And I can be there to have dialogue with you, but I'm not leading any conversations with regard to that, because that is asking for more people of color to extend out more energy and to be of service to people that need to be able to manage that themselves and then find out how they want to be connected to folks. We have autonomy. There's a way to consent to that. With regard to where I am fighting, it's to me and my work in the Calibri Center for Systemic Training, which is one of the major research arms in training, a curriculum building things that like I've been pushing for and doubling down on, is like making it like very clear that the organization really wants to focus on making sure that the curriculum and the support, excuse me, that therapists have and therapists in training have are really centered around anti-oppression work, anti-racism work, neuro-affirming, and disability justice access, right? That people understand that they have to do some work and they need to be knowledgeable about doing their best to make sure our therapy rooms and outside our communities are inclusive spaces for everyone and have safe spaces of healing for everyone. So I've doubled down on the mission, right, of social justice. And I'm down with it. It's just what it is.
I love it. I want to hear more from Jazzy now as a student. How are you doing with all of that? Do you find yourself having conversations with other students or your maybe professors you feel safe with? Tell me more about how you're doing in this climate and how are you staying?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I'm just oohing and ahhing at everything Dr. Pennant just dropped on us. So I'm metabolizing that. But I think the honest answer is that like I'm struggling as a student, as a Black student in a predominantly white institution, as a non-binary student in this time when transness is like being, I'll say what it is, being criminalized all over our nation. I think that it is challenging, but I think that, like you all said, like really contextualizing self care as resistance, and as Audre Lorde said, like as political warfare. I think for me, I get really grounded in my own context, which is like I'm really grounded in reproductive justice. I am a birth worker, I am a life worker. I exist in the lineages of Black feminism, and I think that those things are really grounding. I think that it really allows me to be rooted in not just the harm that exists currently and has always exists for my communities, but to also be rooted in like our strength and to be rooted in our lessons. And I think that's where it feels a little exhausting sometimes to be in classes like Dr. Pennant was saying. It's hard to need non-Black people, to need white allies to really step up, but to be stuck in conversations around how much rest they feel they need, and then feeling like I can't afford rest in this moment. And so really being like okay, self-care, but contextualizing it as political warfare, contextualizing it not as an opportunity to tap out and to isolate, but to really dig in and to consolidate, right? So I really can imagine classrooms being used in a more intentional way. And I'm seeing that a little bit in some courses, but I would love to see it like more throughout. And just allowing classrooms to be spaces where we are practicing systems change, where we are seeing, like, we're tuning to each other, seeing that, like, we're having a collectively challenging time, to utilize our breaks, to encourage breathing, to incorporate self-care like in the moment. Things that we're going to need as future clinicians to be able to pause, to slow down. I think we could really, instead of getting caught up in the rapidness of academia, to like actually pause and to use our skills on one another as we're learning them, and to deepen our conversations about self-care to conversations about community care. So I think my partner and I have laughed at our own just like disheartening fears and feelings around leaving meetings, and everyone is just focused so much on self-care because it's an individualistic way of approaching what we're dealing with in this moment. And I think that one way of doing it is you can ask people what they're doing for self-care, but you can also, and I think more importantly, ask people what their like strengths, talents, and interests are, because it creates a conversation where we begin to build community and we know each other's strengths and we know who we can then go to for the things that we need, right? So we're like actually practicing like resource auditing and distribution, like in our check-ins and checkouts, and doing a little bit more, like pushing a little bit more forward towards collective care as a really important part of self-care. And I think that also again roots me back into just the strengths and the lessons that are provided by the inheritance of struggle that I have and that I share with Dr. Pennant, right? So I think so often we're in classrooms and I hear the co-opted language of our movements, of like Black feminism, of anti-racism, of decolonizing, right? I hear all of these things, but I think that we are given these things, but we focus a lot on just the amount of harm that our communities are facing and not the fact that we have given you these terms, these lenses, these frameworks to work through systems change on the largest social scale. So when Dr. Pennant said that there are legacies of system change already, we can literally point to them in our Black liberation movements, right? In our trans liberation movements, in our decolonizing and re-indigenizing movements. And I think that really thinking about the strengths that those same communities have instead of just the harm that they're inevitably facing and have always faced, I think is really important. And for me, that's reproductive justice, the right to bodily autonomy, the right to have children, to not have children, and to parent in safe and healthy environments. Especially as a sex therapist, it's just such a world building framework, and it encompasses every kind of justice Dr. Pennant just named: access to abortion, access to healthcare, access to gender-affirming care, environmental justice, disability justice, housing, food sovereignty, land. Everything is encompassed in what it means to live a free life under reproductive justice as a framework. So I think that getting grounded in our strength, leaning into community even in the classroom, and to have a framework that we're working in that taps into that larger system change that we've always already been doing, those same communities that we're so worried about right now, I think is really crucial.
Wow, how I'm gonna follow. I'm gonna follow. That was amazing. I trusted Dr. Pennant, Jazzy, when he said, Jazzy will be great. They will do fantastic in this. And okay, first master student, let's see how it goes. Yeah, I get it. I get it now, Dr. Pennant. Thank you. So thank you so much for sharing this. This gives me so much to digest as an educator. It gives me a lot of food for thought. So I appreciate you, and I hope our listeners take some of what you shared with us and take it into their own academic communities and work with it. Jazzy talked already about sex therapy, so my next question will move into this space, teaching sex therapy, and how in this climate that we discussed just now, how do we teach our students to have these difficult conversations about the impact, the systemic oppression that's happening right now and historically, but very much right now, it's so palpable. How do we teach sex therapy and initiating these vulnerable conversations with our clients and with our students? I'm gonna circle back to Dr. Pennant, and I want to hear his thoughts on this.
Sure, I like this. There's one thing I would like to go back briefly to that Jazzy said, and then I'll pull it forward. I think this is there. It's the element around community care as opposed to self-care. And when I think a little bit about how students enter into programs and faculty are in academic institutions, we are in a community together. And students, I think, trust their professors to be able to create safe environments to learn. And a lot of that is on the faculty, but I think a lot of it is on the students too, right? It's a co-created collaborative environment where folks can really figure out, based on the cohort, based on the people that are there, based on the identities of everyone that's in the room, about how to further have and further conversations. The one thing that I think is really important with regard to how we're teaching sex therapy, and given all of the things that we've talked about, it's furthering the conversation. I think most programs do a really good job, right? Like in the United States, and I think around the world, around giving people the basics and the minimum, right? These are the things you need to do in order to do your job. And that's really important, right? I don't want to minimize that at all. And that is not where most people enter into therapy, specifically around sex therapy, needing. We need to be able to support students and our like fellow faculty members that are teaching and creating environments for folks to learn, to be able to not go just to be in 101, to maybe go to 401, right? Meaning like the class 401, it's advanced or intermediate to advanced. There has to be some kind of like forward motion around how we are really getting people to understand some of the really important topics that they may miss, and we make it a part of our curriculum. And then throughout our programs are the bigger thing for me too, right? If a student comes in and learns this in this one class, and then they never come back to that again based on the myriad around of things that they'll learn, right? Around systems, around multicultural perspectives, around sex therapy, around abusive relationships and sex therapy, and all of like the things that they learn, like how will they understand how impactful that it is? This is one probably another question, but there are layers of things, and there are layers to each person, and depending on each person, there's an impact of how they show up, how they digest information, how they react, how they don't react. Some of the ways that we as therapists need to be able to position ourselves to support people to understand that it is okay to process through those things, to acknowledge that there are hurts, to acknowledge that there are vulnerabilities, to acknowledge that there might be questions or curiosities, right, around how they are viewing things, to make it a really truly safe space to be able to do the work that they want to do and we want to do with them. And so that comes about by really making sure that like our conversations as like professors and with students are truly comprehensive and challenge them to grow, but also challenge us to grow, right? And to really truly plan out what curriculum looks like for folks. To give people, I think this is maybe like my last thing, to give students, I think, an opportunity to learn also, right, about themselves and to be able to afford to make mistakes. I think some of this ties into some of the personal therapist framework that we use at Antioch, but I was trained in that, I've written about that in numerous ways, but the ability to be able to manage oneself and then manage the bias that might come up or the reactivity that comes up. And that reactivity could be about reacting and doing something more like noticeable, but it also could be about collapsing, being quiet, becoming so anxious and nervous that you remove yourself from the situation. And we all know that what we do as therapists is intensely personal, right? And people will feel when if they talk about things that are really like vulnerable, or there are parts of them that are very oppressed, right, or maligned in some particular way, or specifically criminalized, they will feel if we pull away from that in conversation, they'll go, oh, that's that thing. I'm not a safe, that person's not a safe person, or there's something about me that's offensive, right? There's lots of things that they can internalize. And with regard to how all of this and this community care is built into, I think, being able to teach sex therapy is really giving people, I think, again, the opportunity to like engage with the material in a way that allows them to grow. We need to be able to grow. I think there needs to be less of a Eurocentric approach to sex therapy, because how people, specifically for individuals that identify as women and multiple like cultures, like they have more power around sex or pleasure, or they may be the initiator with things, or to be able to please a woman that you might be in a relationship with is considered what the paramount is. It's not about the penis holder ejaculating or doing any of those particular things. And outside of that, there are different constellations of relationships, again, that have existed in other cultures around the world and in ancient times, and just, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, that aren't talked about. They're not talked about and normalized in a particular way. Sex therapy has done a decent job of being able to be, I think, a little more queer inclusive, which I'm a fan of just in general. And that's like in part. That's in part. And so when we start from a place that is more Eurocentric and then create these special topics or subtopics of, and guess what? If you work with this population, this is how you move. If you work with that population, then that's how you move. Then it becomes an othered. And again, I understand why it's done that way, but it doesn't mean that we have to continue that way. And I think where I've seen the most success is that in my classrooms and some of the faculty that I work with, when we move the content and the centering of those who are most oppressed to being the center of it and then build out from there, it's more inclusive. Again, it doesn't mean that people won't be covered. It doesn't mean that heteronormative standards aren't talked about or that it's maligned in some way. People have the right to align their lives in heteronormative standards, absolutely. And people have the right to not do that. And how we choose to teach these things, all these concepts, right? If it's starting from a point that is less inclusive and then everyone is a special topic later, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah. Jazzy, have you taken a course with Dr. Pennant in relation to sex therapy? Would you like to share a little bit more about your experience as a student through this
I would
course?
love to, because let me give Dr. Pennant his flowers.
His flowers, yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
absolutely. Yes. And I think that this also touches back on a little bit of the first series of questions that we had, because Dr. Pennant has been such a lifeline for me to have a Black queer advisor who is in leadership in the program, a Black queer advisor who is like actively adapting theoretical approaches that actually see us, that center us, like he said. I mean, it's Lifeline doesn't even touch on like how impactful it is. I think that it allows me to really see myself in this field long term. It allows me to think about the benefits of this field for relationships like the one that I'm in. So I took a seminar with Dr. Pennant. It was my second quarter, and I took his seminar on his multi-dynamic relational therapy model. And I just call it the Black queer therapy model. It was very Black, very queer, and it just really centered and I'll use some of his language, the constellations that are like Black family dynamics and Black queer family dynamics specifically, where a lot of it is chosen, a lot of it is situational, a lot of it is open and fluid, is non-binary, is trans. And a lot of those things are just like thrown in the other bucket in traditional sex therapy models. But I think Dr. Pennant really was able to focus on those othered people as like the like epitome of what it means to live a multi-dynamic life, to be a multi-dynamic person, and to build a relationship model around folks who have some level of like instability in their familial relationships that is transformed into stability through choice. So again, going back to what I had said about like really thinking about the strength and the power of our communities instead of just the deficits that therapists need to support and advocate for, but actually what does it do to center us what possibilities does it open for every other kind of relationship formation? And it's really powerful stuff. And it was the first time that I had actually heard like some of those co-opted languages that I mentioned before used like correctly and with power, with intention, right? Like power analysis being a part of the model, liberation being a part of the model, radical emancipation. I don't want to give anything away because I'm sure I know you're writing something or something about it, but it is something that is really, it's really needed in how sex therapy is taught, but it's also just how systems therapy is taught, systems thinking is taught. And I think that sex therapy gets to be the experimental front line because that's where a lot of the other people get bucketed, right? Get pushed towards. Yeah, and so I think that it creates an equal playing field for what sexuality looks like, because so much of queer sexuality is considered, if it was a hetero person, kinky or taboo, like really different, but it's just like a Tuesday night for us. It's just, we're just living our lives and finding our pleasures. And so I think normalizing that really opens up what sexual pleasure can mean to more cisgendered heterosexual couples and relationship formations. That I think is like it opens up new worlds for the field and for Black folks and Black queer folks getting access to therapy by clinicians who maybe know a thing or two. That is like really important, to take that element of having to educate and normalize your story for your clinician. I think it's going to make therapy just so much more accessible for folks like me. But I really enjoyed that class. It felt like I didn't have to code switch. I could talk the language that I talk. I can talk about the realities of my own relationship in a way that's not othered or a way that's not complicating the conversation, or it felt really centered and it felt really human and it felt really good. So I just really appreciate Dr. Pennant a lot and really excited for the future of this model and what it's going to really bring to systems thinking as it connects like ways of being that are more like decolonial
Mm.
and centers that.
Oh, amen. Oh, Dr. Pennant, is this your baby, this model? Do you wanna introduce the baby to the world? Are you writing about this baby? Can our listeners find any information about your baby somewhere?
I was about to say thank you, Jazzy. I feel like you talk about the model way more better than I did. So I really appreciate that. I really do. Thank you. Yes, this is my baby. This is my child. This is my friend. This is me, right? This is an extension of other folks that like I have met before that have navigated the world in a way that was really difficult, but I think language is really important and language is not neutral. And when you're unable to find yourselves in other places or it be normed, it becomes it's really difficult, is what I'd say. This model, yes, the queer Black model, I am writing about it. At the end of the month, I am going to be submitting a draft, thankfully, to a publisher that just talks about it in its entirety. So yes, I did teach this class for Jazzy and a couple of folks. It was a full class, and I think the students really enjoyed it. In its essence, yes, it is about queer Black love and queer Black relationships and queer Black families. And many of the individuals that belong in those particular tribes have chosen family. And it's not that they don't have familial and biological like connections. Many do, but the expansiveness of it is really important. And understanding that like it's a again, we exist within multiple dynamics, and it's depending on who we are and who we're with and where we are. We really try to make sure that we have the ability to stay grounded and regulated and be able to be connected with other people. And it is about survival on some level, but it's about thriving, right? When I think about chosen family, these are the people that I want to be connected to and vice versa. That again goes back to what Jazzy had said in the beginning about community self-care, right? Knowing that there is something that we get from other people and vice versa, and being in community and communication with them that grounds us, regardless if if you're introvert or extrovert. It's not about that. It's about that support and safety that you have. But to talk a little more about the model, it represents a way of being able to really support queer folks and have an expansion around what relationships look like. The aspect I'll say briefly around power is really important. We always talk about power, and power is really spoken about when we don't have it, right? But we have a lot of power. We do have an ability to make changes within our environments around. And so it's important to understand where and how we share power in relationships, right? And what that means for us to hold power and to not hold power, and how we can increase safety perhaps in relationships depending on that. And then the other aspect is around like liberation, and there's also like values, but I won't go into that now. But liberation and radical emancipation. Liberation is an individual thing, I believe, that allows people to say, no matter what is happening, I'm going to live my best life. I'm going to do and choose the things that I need to do for me. And I think in part, that is what the Black Power liberation movement was. And we think a little bit about that. We can't do anything about this circumstances. It's not going to stop. But for where I'm able to choose, I'm going to choose this, choose peace, choose power, choose love, choose connection. Those things are really important. And then the radical emancipation is akin to like third order change, but it's really where people can together decide how they want to change their community. And so Jazzy, you said something about heteronormative folks really thinking that queer sex is like kinky, and the amount of folks that have come into my office for sex therapy and they don't describe it as kinky anymore. And so we want to just do this. And so there's an element of people understanding that like queer sex is expansive, queer love is expansive, and being able to be connected to people in different ways and having the ability and autonomy and consent to just move around and be who you want to be. And I will go back to these values, the values that we think that are necessarily important, and those societal expectations, right, around that. Some values really might be important. Some expectations might really be important, but many of the expectations that we keep they're self-enforced or community enforced, right? And they're not always correct, right? So ways, how do we like manage all of that? Can I just be really like vulnerable for a second about expectations? So I am getting married soon. I'm very happy about that. And so I'm planning the wedding. My mom calls me up and she was like, hey, I want to walk you down the aisle. And I was like, I don't know if we're doing that. That may not be something we're doing. It's a queer wedding. That's a heteronormative standard. And it's not that it's wrong. We'll just not be doing that. And then we talked through some things, and she's really excited to be there. It's part of the reason why she asked. And I came back to my partner later, and I talked about it in therapy like that week. And I was like, I felt such a pull in that moment to go like, all right, you can have it. Like, I'll do it. And they say, again, the expectation that people have when they're getting married is that someone will be given away. And in those particular moments, that may not be true for me. And I still fight with that. And that comes up in relations. That's an example of how society, those expectations impact our relationship. And again, it's not a good or a bad or like a positive or negative. Again, the model looks at it a way that there's multiple dynamics. And if we only look at things between two poles, right, this dichotomy, then it limits where people are, right? It limits what we're able to do. And again, the answer for me was it's not a yes or no. We're not doing that, but the other part is that you can be included in a way, mom, right, that honors you. And how about we co-create something that is native to my relationship that may not match that heteronormative standard? If I was going to any other therapist that didn't know me and wasn't up to date on some of the things I was talking about, they would say, maybe that's just what it is. And you have to figure out that anxiety. But then that puts me in a place of having to compete with something that I didn't necessarily need to compete, and then creating a condition for me to be anxious about something I don't need to be anxious about. Wow. And so that's what this model represents in a little bit. And really quickly, sorry, one more last thing. So this model does live on the Calibri Training website. And I've had the joy of being able to teach this class. And I presented about it last year in the Association for Family Therapy annual conference in the UK. So that was really great. They really loved it. And so it is out there, and hopefully this book will be out there soon.
Okay, awesome. I would love to share the link to your center for the listeners in our show notes, and any other resources you want to share, both you, Jazzy, and Dr. Pennant. I would love to give listeners some more resources and things that they can use for further inspiration and shared knowledge in this area. This is what this podcast is about, right? This conversation, I feel it's very healing for me. I don't know if I needed this on this Friday afternoon that we're recording. So thank you both. When you were describing the model, Dr. Pennant, was thinking like sex positive and intersectionality got together and had a baby, and then this came out. But it sounds like it's that times 100. It's like a lot more beyond the inclusive, sex positive, intersecting identities model. It sounds like it's a lot more than that.
That is correct. It is a paradigm shift for how we look at relationships, which, again, nothing wrong with sex positivity and the other aspect of intersectionality. Those things are very important. And, but this is a paradigm shift. I think that we don't understand and don't really honor very much how connected we are to people. And we don't necessarily incorporate that level of systemic understanding and intervention on relationships, specifically queer relationships. Again, it's always taught as like a special topic. And if we are able to really understand that we truly have choices and can be attuned to both in the moment and over time as to how we move as individuals and that responsibility and how we consent into relationships ongoing, right? Ongoing, then it really brings to life what it means to be in relationship with each other. This model, I would say briefly, is so applicable to intimate relationships of any kind, but it's applicable in family work, it's applicable to individuals, it's applicable in group work. And so again, this is shifting paradigms about how we think about relationships and how we maintain them.
I love it. I can't wait to read more about it. I'm so intrigued. Jazzy, did you have any thoughts? I know Dr. Pennant spoke for a while, but I just wanted to check in.
Yeah, I think my concluding thought, if I had to choose one, is that I really just want to see what is happening in the community on the ground around larger systemic work around social work, right? There are Black women, Black trans people, queer people on the ground right now organizing for themselves, right? And I want that to really be seen and held in academic spaces where we're teaching clinicians how to support marginalized groups or groups who are the most impacted by the legislation and the everything that's just happening in this moment right now, because it's more than just the legislation, it's many things. I really want to connect how future clinicians are thinking about doing the more couples and familial systems work and connect that with the people who are on the ground doing the social and larger systems work, because when I tell you organizing, we need to work on our familial things, right? Because it comes up and it disrupts organizing because we don't know how to deal with conflict. We don't know how to feel safe around other people. We don't know how to feel safe enough to lean into community. And then you have on the other side people who are so focused on familial dynamics and couples dynamics, who have the skills to do healing justice work, who are not really thinking about the fact that people are on the ground right now moving for the largest possible systems change. And I just feel like there are just transferable skills that are right now pretty incongruent. I hear the language being used in the classroom, but I don't think it's being used correctly. The way that intersectionality is used on the ground is very different than how it's used in the classroom. And I think that the people in the classroom are not aware of the difference. And I think if we were actually using language the same, if we had a shared vernacular around change making on the largest scale and on the smallest scale, on the individual scale, on the familial scale, and on the social scale, we would be so much more organized in our resistance and so much more prepared for this moment and for just future world building efforts, I think.
Yeah, I am very curious. I don't know if you can give an example maybe of how you see things differently translated in the classroom, like intersectionality versus how it's translated in social advocacy efforts, Jazzy.
Yes. Excuse me, Dr. Pennant, as I Yeah, go off on my TED Talk here. Yes, this is actually was probably the most uncomfortable part about going from the ground, the community work in reproductive justice and organizing and moving into the classroom was that everyone was using intersectionality and I was like, yes, this is my language. And then I realized we were using it differently and it was like really disheartening. So intersectionality, to like go directly to the source, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality as a metaphor for understanding the ways that like multiple forms of inequality, multiple forms of oppression, sometimes like really lay on top of each other, can compound themselves to create obstacles that we don't even see, that we can't even perceive through like conventional ways of thinking for people who are multiply oppressed. So that's, she gets a prism because of people think that race discrimination happens the same for all Black people and gender discrimination happens the same for all women. And then you have those like intersections of how they're confounded. And it's really a way of analyzing power. It's like a lens to look at our movements, to look at our structures, and to evaluate and see the things and the people and the conditions that otherwise wouldn't have been seen, like the particular ways that Black women are oppressed in their own right because the multiple oppressions, the specific way that Black trans women are oppressed, right? So it's not just about, and I think in the classroom, it has really become is more of like the addressing model, right? Where you're just naming when someone has power and when someone does not have power based on all of their different identities. And intersectionality is not identity. It's not just about, not everybody is experiencing intersectionality. Intersectionality is a way of looking at how everyone is experiencing. And it's a hard thing to like fully articulate, but the distinction is really important because like I have people in classes with me talking about how they're experiencing intersectionality as a white queer person and I'm like, huh? I don't think we're using the language in the same way because the Black feminists who created that language definitely didn't make it with you in mind and made it to like really appreciate the way that people are socially located, but not just to for us to identify every possible intersection, every possible identity. And that's not really what it's for, but that's how it's used in the classroom versus how it's used in the community as a way to, like Dr. Pennant was saying about his model, to really center the most marginalized in communities so that everything is as inclusive as possible and the people who aren't being seen get to be at the center. And that is a paradigm shift, like Dr. Pennant was talking about. And I think it's so funny because I agree that Dr. Pennant's model is using intersectionality in a way that most models aren't. But Dr. Pennett's using the language of multi-dynamic. And I actually think that's what people are talking about in the classroom is that people are multi-dynamic. They're moving through a lot of different contexts. What are the names of those contexts? And how does that show up in how they present in front of you as a clinician? I think that's what people are talking about when they talk about intersectionality. And it's just not the same as what community is using and organizing around or how the creator of the language intended it to be.
Yeah, and so I appreciate how well you articulated this, Jazzy. I am just so excited about everything you're doing and will be doing in our field in this generation. It's super, super exciting for me to be witnessing the brilliance here. Okay, I am gonna wrap this up in a pretty bow and say a big thank you to our fantastic guests, Dr. Anthony Pennant and Jazzy Bryant, for sharing their experiences with us. I hope their wisdom will help our fellow educators and listeners and students on their own academic career journey. Dr. Pennant, how can listeners interested in your work reach out to you?
Thank you very much, Viola, both of you. I enjoyed this conversation. And the best way to reach out to me will be two ways. You can email me at anthony@mhcllc.org, or you can find me in my work at the Colibri, COLIBRI, trainingcenter.com.
Wonderful. And Jazzy, how can listeners interested in your work reach out to you?
Yeah. So you can email me at jazzybeandoula@gmail.com. Or you can find me on Instagram at jazzybeandoula.
Fantastic. To our listeners, I hope you found today's discussion inspiring, healing, enlightening. If you're hungry for more engaging conversations about systemic therapy, be sure to follow our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. We have exciting episodes coming up every month, so stay tuned. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, keep connecting with each other and learning. This is Dr. Sofia Georgiadou signing off for Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy.